In 1882, a father in Jerusalem made a decision that sounds almost unhinged. He decided his newborn son would grow up speaking a language that literally no one on earth spoke as a native tongue anymore. Not one person. For over 1,700 years, this language had lived only in prayer books and scrolls, great for reading, useless for ordering bread. The father's name was Eliezer Ben-Yehuda. The language was Hebrew. Today, over 9 million people speak it. Israeli teenagers text in it. Rappers rap in it. And somehow, this dead language came roaring back to life inside one lifetime. But here's the real mystery. Hebrew wasn't the only thing that came back. An entire people scattered across 100 countries, speaking a dozen different languages, separated for almost 2,000 years, somehow held together long enough to rebuild a nation on the exact same strip of land they'd been kicked out of. Twice. How does a people survive 2,000 years without a country? What actually held them together when literally everything else, the land, the temple, the language, got taken away? And why did one stubborn dad in Jerusalem think teaching his kid only Hebrew was the move? Stick around. It gets weirder. So how do you survive losing literally everything? To answer that, we have to go back further than you'd think. Around 1000 BCE, a small kingdom formed in the hills between the Mediterranean and the desert. Israel. It later split into two. Israel up north, Judah down south, because apparently even ancient kingdoms couldn't avoid sibling rivalry. Judah had Jerusalem. Jerusalem had the temple. And the temple was the whole point. Then, in 586 BCE, Babylon showed up and wrecked everything. Temple burned. City flattened. Thousands dragged off in chains. This should have been the end of the story. Most ancient peoples, once you destroy their temple and drag them off their land, just dissolve. Get absorbed. Become a footnote. This is where the rulebook gets written. Remember it, because everything else in this video is just this rulebook playing out, over and over, for 2,000 years. Rule 1, keep the story. Rule 2, keep the law. Rule 3, keep the hope. Not keep the palace. Not keep the army. In Babylon, exiled Jews didn't build a new temple. They built something almost more dangerous to forget, a portable one. The synagogue. A building you could rebuild anywhere, because the real temple was now the text. Rabbi, sarcastic, we lost the palace? Fine. We lost the army? Fine. But nobody is taking the book. About 50 years later, Persia conquered Babylon and, shockingly, let the exiles go home, fulfilling what the prophets had called 70 years of exile. They rebuilt the temple. Round 2. Here's the thing that made this different from every other conquered kingdom in the ancient Near East: most of them left behind a language, some ruins, and nothing else. This one left behind homework. Scrolls got copied. Laws got argued over, line by line, in rooms full of people who would never see their homeland again but treated the argument itself like it mattered more than the outcome. Imagine losing your house in a fire and responding by memorizing the blueprints so precisely you could rebuild it from memory, decades later, in a completely different country. That's basically what happened. And for the next 500 years, this rulebook, story, law, hope, got tested by literally every empire that rolled through: Greeks, Egyptians, Syrians, and eventually, the biggest bully on the ancient block: Rome. So what happens when keep the story runs into the most efficient empire in history? Rome didn't do subtle. When a Jewish revolt broke out in 66 CE, Rome sent legions, not diplomats. By 70 CE, Jerusalem was on fire. The Second Temple, the one rebuilt after Babylon, was torn down stone by stone. Historians say the gold melted between the cracks of the pavement, and Roman soldiers pried up the stones just to scrape it out. Read that again. They dismantled the building to chase melted gold. Losing a temple once was a tragedy. Losing it twice, permanently, was something closer to a death sentence for the whole idea of Jewish nationhood. But, plot twist, the rulebook held. No temple? Fine. The rabbis doubled down on Rule 2, keep the law. Prayer replaced sacrifice. Study replaced ceremony. A person could lose their home, their city, their temple, and still open a scroll and be, functionally, at home. Then came round 2 of the rebellion, in 132 CE, led by a man named Bar Kokhba, who some briefly believed might be the Messiah. He wasn't. Rome crushed the revolt so hard that historians estimate over 500,000 people died. And Rome didn't stop at military victory, it renamed the entire province Syria Palestina, specifically to erase the word Judea from the map. Roman official, smug Judea? Never heard of it. Think about that. An empire tried to delete a people's name from their own homeland. It didn't work. But it did kick off the real diaspora, the long, scattered exile that would define the next 1800 years. So if you erase a people's name from the map and scatter them across 3 continents, what's actually left holding them together? Picture this: one people, no army, no country, scattered from Spain to Persia to Yemen to Poland, and somehow the rulebook keeps replicating itself, community after community, language after language. Here's the fast version, because there's a lot of it. Expelled from England in 1290. Expelled from France multiple times through the 1300s. Massacred across Germany during the Crusades. Forced into walled quarters in Venice, the actual origin of the word ghetto. Expelled from Spain in 1492, the same year Columbus sailed, on pain of death or conversion. Absorbed into the Ottoman Empire, where things were, relatively, less brutal. Confined to the Pale of Settlement in Russia. Hit by wave after wave of pogroms through the 1800s. That's centuries. That's continents. And through basically all of it, 3 things stayed constant. The story, kept alive at Passover dinners and Torah readings. The law, kept in study houses from Baghdad to Krakow. And the hope, one specific line, repeated at the end of nearly every Passover Seder for almost 2,000 years, in nearly every language on earth. Next year in Jerusalem. Not someday. Not maybe. Next year. Said by people who, statistically, would never see it happen. Said anyway. Generation after generation after generation. That's not nostalgia. That's a survival strategy with a really long timeline. And it's worth pausing on how strange that actually is. Picture a family that gets evicted from the same house 9 separate times across 9 different countries, over 900 years, and every single time, when they unpack in the new place, the first thing they set up isn't the furniture. It's the bookshelf. That's not a metaphor. That's roughly what happened, over and over, from Baghdad to Toledo to Krakow. So how does a 2,000-year-old prayer turn into an actual plan? Fast forward to the late 1800s. Europe was, despite the fancy suits and new inventions, still deeply hostile to Jewish communities. Pogroms were spreading across Russia. Then came a case that shook a lot of assimilated European Jews out of a comfortable illusion. The Dreyfus Affair in France, where a Jewish army officer was falsely convicted of treason, and crowds in the streets of supposedly civilized Paris chanted for Jewish blood. A journalist named Theodor Herzl watched this happen and reached a brutal conclusion: assimilation wasn't going to save anyone. If Jews were always going to be treated as outsiders no matter where they lived, the answer wasn't to blend in harder. It was to build a home. In 1897, Herzl organized the First Zionist Congress, and modern political Zionism, the movement to re-establish a Jewish homeland, was born. Meanwhile, back in Jerusalem, remember our stubborn dad? Eliezer Ben-Yehuda had a theory that a homeland needed more than land and politics. It needed a working, spoken, everyday language, not just a language for prayer. So he did the extreme version, raised his son speaking almost nothing but Hebrew, invented hundreds of new Hebrew words for things the ancient world never had, like newspaper, bicycle, ice cream, and got mocked constantly for it. Neighbor, unimpressed you're seriously teaching that kid Hebrew? For what? Talking to the prophets? He didn't care. Waves of Jewish immigration, called Aliyah, started arriving in Ottoman and then British-controlled Palestine through the early 1900s, buying land, draining swamps, building farms and towns out of close to nothing. The rulebook was mutating. Keep the story, keep the law, keep the hope, and now, at a fourth line nobody had dared write yet, build the place. But what does it actually take to turn stubborn hope into an emergency? Between 1941 and 1945, the Holocaust murdered 6 million Jews, roughly 2 out of every 3 Jews in Europe. It's the kind of number that stops making sense as a number. This wasn't persecution anymore. It was an attempt at total erasure, industrialized. After the war, survivors, many with literally nowhere else that would take them, pushed harder than ever for a homeland where being Jewish wasn't a death sentence. In 1947, the United Nations voted to partition British-controlled Palestine into 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab. Jewish leadership accepted it. Neighboring Arab states and Palestinian Arab leadership rejected it. War followed almost immediately. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion stood in Tel Aviv and read a declaration establishing the State of Israel. 2,000 years, give or take, after that temple burned in Rome's fire, next year in Jerusalem, stopped being a line in a prayer book and became an actual return address. Survivor, quiet, they said we'd never see it. We said the line every year anyway. It wasn't a clean, storybook ending. The 1948 war displaced hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs, and the question of borders, statehood, and competing claims to that same land is still, right now, unresolved, a story far bigger than one video can hold, and one worth understanding on its own terms. But here's what makes this specific rebirth so historically strange: this is present tense now. It's happening. Hebrew, the language nobody spoke natively for over 1,700 years, is right now the daily language of millions of people, arguing about traffic, writing pop songs, complaining about the weather. In a language that was basically frozen in scripture for longer than most modern countries have existed. That kid Ben-Yehuda raised? His name was Itamar. He grew up to become, as far as anyone can tell, the first native Hebrew speaker in nearly 2,000 years. So that weird detail from the beginning, the dad who raised his kid speaking a dead language? That wasn't stubbornness. That was Rule 4 in action: build the place, starting with the words in your own kid's mouth. 2,000 years. A destroyed temple, 2 exiles, a scattered diaspora across 100 countries, a genocide, and somehow, at the end of it, a national anthem sung in a language that, for most of that timeline, nobody spoke out loud at all. So here's my question for you, out of everything in this video. The melted temple gold, the next year in Jerusalem line, the dad who only spoke Hebrew to his kid, which detail actually stopped you in your tracks? Drop it in the comments. And if stubborn survival stories are your thing, go watch how the Armenian language clawed its way back from its own near erasure. That one's even weirder.